whenever you're in a crisis, whenever you're in crisis mode, see, you have to get to the king. You have to get to the king. The king called for Gehazi, who was a servant. The king calls for servants, people who are going to do something. Don't just call for heroes. He called for a doer, or somebody who had a servant's heart. The king will call for a servant. And notice what the king said. He said, tell me, please, all the great things that Elisha has done. He says, tell me the great things that Elisha has done. Elisha was a prophet. He didn't say, tell me the great thing that Elisha has said. Let me say this to you. Well done is always better than well said. Well done is always better than well said. I think that was well said, if I do say so myself. But well done is always better than well said. The king asked, he said, tell me all of the great things that Elisha has done. But when you're in a crisis, you want to depend on, here's the thing that you want to depend on. You want to depend on God's promise. You want to depend on God's promise. Is there a promise from God? Every time God gives a promise, there is always a problem in front of the promise. They had the promise of the promised land, but there was a problem of the Red Sea in front of it. Isn't it something that every time that God gives us a vision, he gives us an answer, there's a problem in front of it? You know, you can see the answer, but now the problem is, how am I going to afford it? You ever been, am I the only one who's ever been to that thing? I mean, you got a promise, but you also have a problem in front of your promise. There's always a problem right in front of the promise. There's always something, a problem to come to mess up the promise. But God gives us a promise. And every promise has a benefit. It has a benefit. If it is a promise, it has a benefit. Promises have benefits. Promises have benefits. And let me give you some of the things of God's promise. God has promised us his presence. He said, I will always be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. His presence, he gives us the promise of his presence. The benefit to us is that we are never alone. You are never alone. That's the benefit. If you had to just make a list of promise and then benefit, so that you can see that there is a corresponding benefit to every promise that God gives us. It is a promise that weeping may endure for a night, but it's also a promise, a benefit to us, that joy comes in the morning. You see, every time he gives a promise, he also gives a benefit. He's promised us his presence. The benefit is that we are never alone. God promises us his protection. He is a shield all about us. He's our rear guard. He is our protection. The benefit is that he keeps us safe. God keeps us safe. He's our shelter from the storm. The name of the Lord is a strong tower. The righteous run into it and they are safe. He's our protection. He's our protection. He keeps us safe. He keeps us safe. And then God is our peace. That's a promise. He's our peace. He's our peace. You got all of these things going around you. As I have traveled the world, I'm amazed at impoverished nations and how much peace they have. It makes me wonder who is really successful, because they are not stressed out over being overextended in debt because no credit was extended to them. Isn't that a nice problem to have? Well, you're not in any debt. And so they don't have any stress. And so it appears that as though they're happy, but their lives are peaceful. They may not have much, but they are peaceful. Being rich is not determined by how much you have. Being rich is really determined by how little you need. And they can be in a place and have all of this stuff, and you can be at peace because I don't even need all of that. Who needs an $800 car note? Peace. Peace is always based on what you know. Peace is always based on what you know. Peace is always based on what you know. If God has given you a promise, know that promise. Be still and know that I am God. Peace is always based on what you know. When you get God's peace, the benefit to us is that you don't have to feel insecure. You don't have to feel insecure. God has given us a promise of his perspective, so that we can see from the perspective of God. And the benefit to us is that we get God's eternal view of life. And his eternal view of life keeps us steady when you can get a God perspective. A God perspective. If you're down on the earth and you look up at a problem, it looks like a mountain. But when you get God's perspective, you begin to see that that mountain is not a mountain, it's actually a molehill. It depends on whose perspective you're looking from. And so we get God's perspective. And then we get God's provision. We have a promise of his provision. God will give us our daily bread. He's our provider. The benefit to us is that God meets our needs. God meets our needs. Now, our issue is that oftentimes we have confused needs with wants. It should always be needs over wants. And then God has also promised us his power. He's promised us his power. That those whose hearts are perfect toward him, that there's nothing that he will really keep from us. God will extend to us his power. And it is simply the benefit to us is that God heals us and God delivers us. God heals us and God delivers us. Let me just tell you this, that God demands, he never demands conduct from you that he does not first empower you to achieve. God never demands conduct from you that he does not first empower you to achieve. And I'm going to give you 7 relevant things that will help you in your life of the work of God that happened during times of crisis. Number 1, God liberates. There's some things that you have to kiss goodbye and say so long to. God liberates. God liberates. What does he liberate us from? He liberates us from chains. He liberates us from stains. Stuff on your credit record. Stains, chains, and pains. God liberates us. Stuff that has hurt you from your past. Do you know when you have been hurt, a sign that you have healed is that you can touch that sore spot and it doesn't hurt anymore. I fell off my motorcycle a number of years ago on my way to a party, the only party that I ever went to. And every time that I'm tempted to go to a party, I look at the scar. I don't have a scab. If you got a scab is a sign that your healing is not complete. So I can touch it and it doesn't hurt me anymore because God has healed me of the pain of it. God healed me of the chain of things. Sometimes we've been chained to things, people that have already left us and we're still chained to them. God liberates you from the failures of your past. He liberates you from an identity that had you doing things that were really not the right thing. Because if you don't know who you are, you will always manifest a nature of someone else. And so he liberates us from chains. He liberates us from stains. He liberates us from pains. But God liberates. Number 2, God educates. As you go through this crisis period, you're getting a whole education on having to live on another level of life. You're going to have to stretch some things. You're going to have to come up with some different levels of creativity. And the crisis will pull out of you what you didn't know that you had in you. There are certain things that you will never produce until you are provoked. You remember how the pearl is formed? A pearl is formed because an irritant, a grain of sand, enters into the shell and it irritates the oyster. And when it irritates the oyster, it causes the oyster to start releasing a hormone that actually forms the pearl. And some of the most precious and beautiful things of your life will be formed because somebody irritated you, because an irritant came into you and it provoked you into a blessing. Something that you didn't even know that you had. So you can become educated to even some of the good stuff that's in you when you're in a crisis. God will liberate you. God also educates you. He gives you wise counsel for future direction. Number 3, God compensates. He compensates, and that is that he fills areas in our life where we are weak or where we lack competence. This is a principle that I teach, that you staff your weaknesses. You don't have to be able to do everything yourself. Staff your weaknesses. If you're weak in an area, marry somebody who has a strength in that area. Listen, you need to always marry up. You marry up. Don't listen. It needs to be a blessing to you. Don't marry somebody underneath you. Marry somebody up who's got strengths in areas of your weakness. You need to marry up. Marry up. Now, you can do bad by yourself. It is true. Marry up. Marry up. That's just a word of wisdom to all the single folks. Marry up. Marry somebody that brings out the best in you. And when I'm saying marry up, I don't mean necessarily somebody who's just filthy rich. The Bible says that a good name is a result of good character. Good character. But marry up. Marry somebody that brings the best out in you. Somebody who believes in you. Somebody that encourages you. You need to marry up. You're not going to do well in a merger if one of the parts of the merger is just draining the other one. You need to marry up. Marry above yourself. And you need to celebrate that. Celebrate it. So God compensates us in areas where we are weak by joining things to us that help to compensate for the areas of our weaknesses and downfalls. God liberates us. He educates us. He compensates. Number 4, God motivates us. Motivation gets you going. Habit keeps you going. Some folks can't get going because they lack the motivation. But motivation, it gives us a vision which inspires hope, and it connects us to a purpose that is bigger than who we are. So we have to have motivation. God motivates us. He motivates us. He liberates us. He educates us. He compensates us. He motivates us. Number 5, God regenerates us. That is, He transforms our lives on a higher level by His supernatural resources. God transforms us to live on a higher level by His resources. He regenerates us. He made our bodies to regenerate, to reproduce new cells. If you change your diet and exercise, your body will begin to heal itself and regenerate. You'll be surprised what can happen through regeneration. You've got to constantly reinvent yourself because God has given us the ability to regenerate. You can become regenerated through times of crisis. Number 6, God activates. Not only does He liberate, educate, compensate, motivate, and regenerate, God activates. He commissions us to obey Him and then to move forward in His name. God will give you a commission. He will activate you. He'll activate you. He'll put you in action. Increase comes by action. You're blessed by what you do, by what you do. God can only prosper what you are willing to do. So it activates. Something activates in you. But don't keep living the same in one season when your life has shifted into another. And I want you to be sensitive to know that the times have shifted. A divine shift has happened. And number 7, God elevates. When you go through a crisis, when you come out of that, you are not on the same level. Every crisis leaves you at a different level, a higher level of authority, a higher level of knowledge, and a higher level of responsibility. Every crisis. It elevates you. It embraces us, and then it lifts us up to reign on a total different level in life. You come to a new level. You are never on the same. When you come back, you'll find that God will restore you. Not only did He restore this lady of her house and her land, all of the lost proceeds, everything that she had lost, her house, her land, the proceeds, the money, her rent money from her other property, He said, give it back to her. And it elevated her. And you'll be better after the storm than before the storm happened in your life. God will leave you better if you keep the right attitude. There are only 2 directions that you can go. You either become better or you become bitter. Better or bitter. And let me just declare to you that God is a God of restoration. If you will trust Him through troubled times, through difficult times, through scarcity, through recession, through famine, whatever you want to call it, depression, if you'll trust it, God will open your eyes and he will show you a source. And when your heart is right, and when you have been faithful to the things of God, when you've been faithful with tithes and in offerings, I declare to you that God will take your seed, and God will use your seed to feed you, because every time that I sow a seed, I'm scheduling a harvest. And every sowing of seed is an act of faith, because I believe that greater is coming for me in the future, that God's going to elevate me. It was General Patton who said this. He said, I don't measure a man's success by the heights that he reaches, but by how high he bounces after he hits the bottom. That's the real determinant of success, is how high do you rebound? How do you come back? How much are you elevated after you've hit the bottom? We all live and make mistakes and do things that we later regret. But what's your ability to be able to spring back, to bounce back? I'm looking at a group of comeback kids in here today that have made poor decisions sometimes and bad financial choices, and if we had to go back and do it over again, we'd do some things differently. But I pray that you'd allow God to just educate you through the process, so that in the end it elevates you, and that you're better, that you're stronger, that you're made to be a different person this time. Because we're in very strategic times right now. And I want you to know that when we trust the Lord, as we trust Him, God is going to bring us to a brand new place. He is. God will elevate you through it all. That if you learn to abase, God said, I'll cause you to abound. The way to really go up is to first go down. Did you know that if I really want to be able to jump high, I have to do what? Bend my knees. If I refuse to bend my knees and try to jump, I can only do a little hobble. But if I really want to get off the ground to the degree that I'm able to bow down in humility and say, God, you know what? It's not even because of my education. It's not because of my travels. It's not because of my experience. It's not because of the finagling and the manipulation of human relationships. God has said, listen, I'll show you that you don't put your trust in human institutions. Because I'll cause some of the most formidable ones to crumble. Some of the ones that have been around over 100 years and that we have looked at as symbols of stability. And I'll rock them from their foundations and cause them to crumble. Anything that we begin to set as an idol, God will bring it down. But if it's got real truth in it, truth crushed to the ground, will rise again. We've got to be able to be willing in our own hearts to say, I want to do what's right. I want to make a difference in my life. I want to be where I will make a mark on the sands of time, and I'm not going to just keep living the way that I have been living. It was Dr. Martin Luther King who said to us, if you're a street sweeper, he said, you sweep that street just like Michelangelo painted portraits. If you're a street sweeper, sweep it just like Beethoven composed his music. He said, you sweep that street so that nobody living, dead, or yet unborn could sweep it any better. And he said, if you can't be the tallest pine on the top of the hill, be the best little shrub in the valley. But whatever it is that you do, the only thing that God expects of us is our best, nothing more and nothing less. And when you're going through difficult times, challenge and crisis has the ability not to make you one way or another, but it'll only expose you for who you are. And if you got goodness in you, when you get in a crisis, goodness is what will come out. If mercy is in you, when you get in a crisis, mercy will come out. But I want you to know that this is something that is beyond just where you are. If the love of God is in you, when you get in a crisis, the love of God will come out. But God wants to ultimately elevate you. You might hit bottom, but when you hit it, if you've got the right attitude, God will cause you to rebound and come back to another level. Because some of you have such good hearts that your heart is bigger than your resource to be able to help folks. And God says, you know what, I'm going to let you hit bottom, but it's only so that I can give you a springboard of resistance to help give you the height that you really need. I'm not going to let you fall. I'm going to let you rebound. When you go down, you're not going down to stay. You're going down so you can come back to a higher level. And if it releases from the hand of God, cast your bread on the water, and after many days it'll come back. When it comes back, it's not coming back the same way. God will never return back into your hand things the way that they left your hand. When a seed leaves a farmer's hand, he doesn't reap just a seed back. He reaps back a harvest. Any fool can count the number of seeds in an apple, but only God can count the number of apples in a seed. And what leaves out of your hand will take tractor trailers to harvest. And it may not all be harvested in your generation. We're sowing for the next generation. We're sowing, we're taking responsibility, saying, I'm taking responsibility. That if you're going to ever have something, it's going to be where there is a sacrifice that comes on your behalf. The way you say, I'm willing to sacrifice and do what's necessary. And we're going to take time this Thursday night to pray. God said, if my people, which are called by my name, would humble themselves and pray. We're going to pray on Thursday night at School of the Word. I know that I'm in the midst of a series, but we're going to take time to pray and to do a God thing. Pray for our families. Pray for our government leaders. Pray for our business economy. It's time for us to pray so that whatever change that God wants to happen in us will happen. And whatever God wants to use us to change, that God will spark it in our hearts, and that He will give vision and answers in our hearts. And if we're really serious about God, that we will fight for our families. That we will fight for our families. That's too much. God loves the family to such a degree that He ordained the family before He even ordained the church. And there is such an all-outright war against the family in this day, but God wants to restore and elevate us to a total different level. There's a spirit of greed and avarice that has gripped America and spread to other areas of the world and made us think that we have got to have stuff that we don't even need. And I pray that God will refocus us, that you will get a spiritual equilibrium and be able to discern what is true, weighing it in the balance, that God will give us His judgment in our hearts, and that our families and lives will be fortified. Bow your heads. If you're in this place today, nobody walking, please. If you're in this place today, and you've experienced a great deal of turmoil, and the crisis has brought you to the brink of giving up and sometimes caused even suicidal thoughts to come to your mind, and you're struggling, you're having a hard time, and you realize that your grip is loosening, and you're about to lose that even which you appear to have. You don't know what to do. Amid changing times, your life must grip and hold that which never changes. Hebrews 13:8 declares Jesus Christ the same yesterday, today, and forever. And there are principles that God wants to lay in the foundation of your heart to bring us back to things that we have known, that we have gotten away from. The Old Testament, more so than instructing us, the Old Testament said, remember, 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 remember that it is the Lord thy God who brought thee out of the house of bondage, up out of the land of Egypt. Remember. Remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. Remember. And it's one of the most common commands in the Old Testament is to remember. It is to bring us back to a place where we have gotten away from. It's to restore us to the basics. When you have to strip down, you strip down to the basics. You bring it back to the basics. And God's calling us back to the basics. And some of you are hearing that call. You're right at the brink. You're frustrated. You don't understand what's going on, and you don't even know what to do to fix it. Doors are slammed in your face, and God wanted you to come to the source. He wanted you to come to the source.
Thank you for watching Power for Living with Bishop Dale C. Bronner. Join us again next time.